everyone. Welcome to Inside Quest. We're the Navy SEAL training camp for your brain. Our goal is to bring on amazing people who can help you develop an unbeatable mind. And if you're looking to construct an elite intellect, there's no better guest than the man joining us today. He's an accomplished entrepreneur, highly sought-after speaker and coach, and best-selling author. But what gives his ideology weight is that it was literally forged in the crucible of battle. There are few markers of badassery more universally acknowledged than that of being a Navy SEAL. And today's guest is not only a retired SEAL, but he graduated as Honor Man, #1 ranked trainee, from the notoriously grueling Bud School. He served for 9 years in active duty, including deployment to Iraq, and 11 years as Reserve SEAL, retiring as commander in 2011. His inspiring journey to commander, however, was born of a failed attempt to emotionally adapt to corporate America. A reformed certified public accountant with an MBA in finance, he abandoned the traditional path to success for a life less ordinary after several painful years of trying to live up to his family's expectations that he would join the family business. As he struggled to find his place on Wall Street, he felt besieged by greed and inauthenticity and realized that he had a totally different calling. After a compelling vision of his future began to shape, molded by a deep immersion in martial arts and meditation, he dropped out of the rat race and set his sights on becoming a true leader and warrior as a Navy SEAL. His storied military career, however, was only the beginning of his journey, and he has since translated his success in the armed forces into an impressive career as an entrepreneur. In addition to penning 4 books, including the New York Times bestseller 8 Weeks to SEALFit, he founded and ran several successful ventures, including SEALFit, Unbeatable LLC, NavySeals.com, US CrossFit, and the Coronado Brewing Company. His impressive accomplishments are due to a results-oriented approach as evidenced by his SEALFit program, which took the pass rate for naval candidates from 33% to over 80% on the physical screening test at the Navy boot camp, and his Kokoro camp, which is used by special ops candidates, elite athletes, and civilian high achievers to break through to unprecedented levels of performance. Please help me in welcoming the creator of the #1 fitness podcast, Unbeatable Mind, the man who holds a black belt in Saido and Goju Ryu karate, a senior ranking in Saido ninjutsu, and is an expert in human performance, mental toughness, and physical readiness, the former San Diego University adjunct professor of leadership, Mark Divine.
Wow.
Mark, welcome to the show, man. What a pleasure.
I was thinking, I got to meet this guy you were talking about.
Well, he's here today. Man, what a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, it's mine.
You had me on your podcast, which was amazing. So I had already begun my journey of learning who Mark Divine is, and it was utterly fascinating. And the thing that I think I find really, really intriguing, and I think that people are really going to connect with, is you've corrected course in your life pretty majorly a couple different times, not the least of which obviously being your family, you were headed into the family business, but then realizing that active duty was putting a strain on your marriage, you corrected again to go into the reserves. It seems to me that that plays into your concept of BOO. So if you can explain to people what BOO is, how you can keep an eye on it to really make conscious choices.
Yeah, BOO is an acronym for background of obviousness. And this is an interesting place to start this conversation because BOO is that area of your emotional life that is undiscovered, tapped in terms of your awareness and unresolved. And it causes you to repeat patterns over and over and over. And so by learning to investigate these BOO items or this background of obviousness and then to elicit kind of a more true concept of where you're meant to go in life, then it gives you that momentum and courage to kind of make those hard right decisions.
It's really interesting because I find that not only was I trapped in a BOO, so the reason I started there is for me the construct that I use to think of what you call BOO is the matrix, right? It's so ever present, these assumptions that you make, these beliefs that you have, that you don't realize they're fake. You don't realize you can control them, that you could set aside a belief, you can adopt a new belief based on what serves you more. If you would tell them a little bit about your family, because the family business in particular, because I don't think they understand. It was founded in the 1800s.
Right, yeah.
It's not like this was something they've been doing for the last 10 years and there was a little bit of pressure. I mean, this is like generations of assumptions about what you'll do with your future that you ran against.
Right, and I think everyone has something in their life where there's a lot of energy that propels them in a certain area, and it may not be the right direction. For me, it was this family business called Divine Brothers. It has been in the family for over 100 years. It's one of like 1,000 companies left that are over 100 years old. Wow. anyways, Tom, as you can imagine, growing in upstate New York, the subtle messages from my family were that business is everything, and we're a business family, and a career, let's say, in education as an academic, that's not good. And military, forget about that. You do that only if you are a complete failure in life, right? Those are the kind of messages that were really subtly planted. They weren't things we actively talked about, but these things kind of come in, they seep into you through your family dynamics and the mini cultures that you grow up in. So by the time I got to college, and I of course studied economics because that was going to be as close to a business degree as I could find, and there was no questioning as to whether this was the right path. So when the opportunity came to take a job with Coopers Lybrand in New York City, and they were going to send me to NYU to get my MBA, and all this sounded really good at the time, right? MBA, CPA, stacking up those letters after my name, right? And my family was very supportive, saying, this is good stuff because that's going to be great training ground for you to come back to the family business. Again, if I had not stumbled upon a methodology to tap into the deeper inner recesses of my being, like you did when you jacked out of the matrix, right? Then I could still be there today. And I believe that we all have a guiding, a purpose, right? And for me, that purpose was to be a warrior and a leader. And it wasn't meant to fulfill that initially in a business setting, not in particular, not with my family business.
Looking at you, you look like a Navy SEAL, right? So, and I've read
that's
people's, it is a compliment, and I've read people say that before, and I'm sure that some of that has come from training and becoming a Navy SEAL, but I had so many assumptions going into your story, and the more I learned about you, the more each one of those assumptions was broken, which was, okay, here's a guy probably from a military family, like they were pushing him in that direction. He maybe expresses himself more fully, which is how you get, because obviously your materials looking back, how to become a SEAL and have that level of fitness is very fascinating and obviously on point with somebody who's done it. But I just assumed that was sort of the background. So as I got into it and realized that, and you talk about universal beliefs and you talk about relativistic beliefs, and I saw that at play, and because that's such a fundamental thing for me. I feel that as a leader, I'm entrusted with the lives of a lot of people. And to me, if you ask me, what's the one thing that you have to do? It's to get them to check their boo, right? It's to get them to stop being enveloped in something that is so ever-present, so ubiquitous that they are literally blind to it.
Right.
So walk people through how you walk into a karate dojo one day, and that leads to you abandoning the world's safest career path to the world's most dangerous, literally life-threatening career path.
Yeah. I don't know what the heck I was thinking, actually. Just kidding. I think that when you're ready, your mentor appears. And so the founder of that martial art is a grandmaster, and he is what I would call an enlightened being. Like he had been training his mind, body, and spirit from a very young age. And when I stumbled into his life, he was in his 40s and had been growing this martial art now for I think it was 20 years. They were just about on their 20th anniversary, and he became my primary teacher. In fact, to this day, I've followed a lot of his principles because, he could have been all around the world, floating around, traveling to meet up with, to give speeches or to do that outward stuff. But instead of doing that, he stayed put, like the center post in his universe. So, and he made people come to him. And the way he approached his training was very integrative, meaning it wasn't so much about becoming a fighter, even though that was an important part, because that was the warrior part of the martial art, but it was about becoming a good person. And the term Seido, S-E-I-D-O, which is what the martial art was called, means the sincere way. So one day I was walking down the street on 23rd Street in Manhattan, and I heard these shouts, and it's almost like I felt every shout just calling me up there. And I looked up and I saw the sign for World Seido headquarters, and I walked up there, and there was Nakamura leading a class, and I signed up on the spot. The process was amazing because we would sit in meditation, a process called Zen. Now Zen was nothing but sitting and breathing and counting your breath, and then getting very aware of what's going on inside of your mind, right? And then there's a follow-on process to begin to really focus it and deepen your concentration. And so we would sit in meditation on a little bench before class, and then we would go, get it all out. right? Sweat and clash with other human beings. So a lot of emotional development there, right? And then we would sit in silence again afterwards. Powerful process. And what happened is I started to kind of open up like a new areas of my brain that weren't being accessed. And that silence was allowing information to kind of flow up and through me. And the first kind of wave of that information was that something was wrong with my life and there was a misalignment. Like even though I had all the ego associations with getting the MBA and the CPA and the money was great, there was a broadening sense that it was wrong, that I was a misfit in that world and that I was heading down the wrong path and heading down fast. And so that provided even more impetus or more motivation to try to go deeper. And so I doubled down on my training, which frankly doesn't really work, right? You can't it's not like swinging a kettlebell. You can't do more meditation and expect to have better results.
Really? I'm actually surprised.
It doesn't work that way. No, it's just consistency of effort and to let the process kind of unfold, right? It's really interesting.
Did you know what you were trying to get to unfold at that point?
I did not. This was a process that was one of self-discovery. And so first, I opened up space. And inside that space, I decided that I could get where I needed to go if I asked better questions. And so I knew that what I was doing was not it. And so I began to ask questions around what it could be, right?
What kind of questions? Because that's a really important concept.
It really is. So, for instance, I asked myself the very basic question, what is my purpose? Because I had never considered that. Here I was 24 years old, and I just assumed that my purpose was to be in business, to make money, to have security, to accomplish certain things that had some sort of external measure to it, right? MBA, CPA, six-figure salary, back to run the family business, right? Those were assumptions. That's back to that boo. I never really questioned it.
Right.
But when I started to ask the question, what is my purpose, and what would come up, none of it was that. Right? There was nothing that pointed me in that direction. But what came up, and a lot of times it was imagery, Tom, is imagery or sensations, were warrior. I kept coming back to that word warrior. And leader, right? Leadership was something that really inspired me, and I noticed a major gap in what I thought of leadership and what I was experiencing, on Wall Street as a CPA. And so I worked with those two concepts. And so then the second question I asked myself was, what am I passionate about? And again, I started with a negative because what immediately came up was I'm not passionate about accounting and numbers, and I wasn't passionate about business. And I didn't really like the people I was working with. But then I thought, what was I passionate about? Well, I was passionate about adventure. I was willing to take risks, right? I enjoyed risky things for some reason. That's why I was an entrepreneur, when I got out of the SEALs. I was passionate about fitness and health. In fact, one of the drivers, and this is why I love being here at Quest, was when I got into the corporate world, I literally had to sneak away to stay in shape. And this is back in 1986, 87, 88, 89. So I would run in the morning, go to work. I would sneak away at lunch and go to the gym. Everyone else would go have their martini lunch or whatever. And then,
it's quite the juxtaposition.
Yeah, and then I would go to the dojo, right? Wow. So 3 training sessions a day.
Jesus.
And
while working and going to school?
While working and going to school and studying until 1 a.m., then the next morning rinse, repeat. And that was my kind of routine, my battle rhythm. And none of that could I find in a traditional corporate structure, at least as it existed back in the 80s.
Sure.
And I think nowadays, probably Quest being a good example, that the structure in the corporate world are now starting to supporting that type of growth, right? That type of lifestyle.
Yeah, I hope so, more so. One thing that I really hope you guys get from him, listen to the way he talks, right? Like if you didn't know what he did, would you guess that this guy was a 20-year veteran of the Navy SEALs? No, right? You could buy, maybe he's a yoga instructor. It is, honestly, Mark, that's one of the most compelling things about you, and was the thing that when I first encountered your ideology after doing, or before doing your podcast, but in my research phase, that to me is something so profound. Like, if Tom Cruise hadn't ruined the jumping up on this chair, I would be jumping up on this chair right now. Because, dude, it's what you call holistic training, right?
Right.
So I have every desire to do something incredible with my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
To be somebody special, I think is how you call it. And a willingness to say, yes, like, I'm willing to fight for that. I'm willing to fight to become somebody special, to live a life that is different than what other people are living. And it's not limited, right? Anybody can do that. But the fact that it starts with silence, the fact that it starts with going inward on a path of self-discovery, but that self-discovery can manifest in running a company. It can manifest in truly becoming a warrior.
Right.
Like, I use a lot of the verbiage of the warrior, of aggressive fighting things, because it helps me, tighten my core emotionally, if you will. But it still is an expression of a desire to gain mastery,
right.
and the beauty that is gaining mastery.
Right.
You told a story, and I so want this to hit the audience the way that it hit me, but tell them about the time that you were doing a high altitude jump out of a helicopter, and you look over your friend who's displaying mastery.
Mm-hmm.
It gave me the chills.
Yeah, so that term mastery is an powerful one. When I say that Nakamura was an enlightened master, it didn't mean that he had arrived at some destination. He was continuing his training, and that's an important point. It's a journey. And I was deeply inspired by that, as you are, and that's what led me into the SEALs. And I mean, I dominated SEAL training. I mean, for me, it was a blast, and people were quitting like flies all around me, right? 185 people started my BUDS class. 19 of us graduated.
Whoa!
Right, and I graduated as honorman, and I was having fun every day. It's because of these skills that I try to teach now, of course, and I've had to unpack it and like contextualize it. It really takes about 5 years to become a fully respected operator or SEAL. So part of that training I went through was military free fall training. So we did for 3 weeks out in the desert in California, out in a little town called Holtville. And one of my instructors was a fellow named Mike Liu. And so Mike been in the SEALs for like 15 years at the time. And he was a jump god. And toward the end of the training, we had to do some night jumps. And actually one of the coolest experiences was a pre-dawn jump, where we jumped from like 30,000 feet with oxygen, and we had chem lights so we could track our progress. And I was just getting skilled enough where I could jump out, get stable, and like do a 360 and, kind of have fun. And so I jump out and lose my chaser, right? So every instructor, paired up with a student to make sure disaster didn't happen. And I get out there, and it's dark, and we're really high, so you can see the sun, just cracking over the horizon. And I see all these chem lights from all the other jumpers. And it was like a mystical experience, and I'm just like, this is amazing. And so Lou gives me the signal. He's facing me. He gives me the signal to do a 360. And as I turn back around, he's standing feet to earth. You can imagine that, right? So he's falling 130 miles an hour, 120, 130 miles, and he's standing feet to earth, and he goes like this. He flicks his fingers, and he does a whole 360 and stops himself feet to earth again. And then he just smiles at me, because I'm like going, holy crap, how did you do that?
Right.
He just smiled at me, right? And we never spoke of it, but that, when I looked at that, I said, that was, that's mastery, right? That was mastery of a particular skill, but the person he had to become in order to display that skill was more important to me, right? And so what I realized in that moment, and many successive moments, is that what was happening to us in the SEALs was an institutionally driven mastery path, which was similar in a lot of ways to the personality-driven mastery path that Nakamura had set me on. So his was about his personal values and his personal training to try to develop a whole integrated human being through a martial art. Whereas the SEALs were taking highly qualified individuals that they vetted, and most of them went away, and those of us who were left then put us through this training, which unlocked, increasing in waves, unlocked mental and emotional and even spiritual capacities like that. Yes. Right? And so I wanted to teach that when I got out. I wanted to teach people how to access this, and I wanted to continue my own training. So, kind of got rooted deeply into my philosophy of living.
That story to me is, let me put you in my mindset as I was reading that. And I had the good fortune of, he blogs very, very well, and I encourage you guys to check them out. So you guys have all heard me say, to me, the whole purpose of life is to acquire skills that have utility and then put that utility to the test, right? So gain mastery, to put it another way. So as I'm reading this story, and you're describing, jumping out, running down the ramp and jumping out the back of the helicopter, I'm thinking, that's mastery, man. Like, I couldn't even imagine, running and jumping out of that plane. And that, it almost even though I was sitting behind the desk as comfortable as I could be, I had a little anxiety at the thought of running down,
right.
And I was just like, whoa, I'm not sure.
That would be normal. Yeah.
Right? And so, and as you describe it and you saying, I do the 360, and I'm thinking, whoa, because you describe what you're doing physically. You're like, I arch my back, I get into position, and I do my 360. So I'm imagining all these, to know what to do, to arch your back, to how to hold your hands, how to do the 360. I'm freaking out. This is amazing. And then the reveal, and he's standing there like a bullet, feet to earth. And you were like, and I realized I was seeing mastery.
Right. And
I just had the chills, and it was so beautiful. And that to me, because I don't think people understand, the quest for mastery is a beautiful pursuit. It is a beautiful pursuit. It is so fun, and it makes you feel alive. When you find that thing, for me, right, the three of us in that progression, me, you, and then Mike, are just stages for you of mastery, right? There will be the moment where you're like, I can't believe I'm gonna, whatever, leave my... We'll point to this young lady here in the front. To move away from the home that I've lived at my entire life, doing a job that I've had for a decade, doing exactly what I know, all safe, everything, and then the next day be somewhere else. That's stage one. And at that point, you can't imagine where you're going to be in 10 years and the numerous skills that you will have acquired every step of the way, more beautiful than the last, if you're doing it as a spiritual quest, right? And that's the thing that, dude, I am into the way you look at the world, because you, literally, you're trained to kill people, but you sound like this totally at ease spiritual dude. And you'll be, in fact, walk us through the colors of alertness.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to say that you just kind of sparked is that the authentic warrior is the last to pick up the spear. Right? The authentic warrior has developed himself and cultivated mastery to where he has love for his enemy and all sentient beings at that level. So that's mastery in the warrior archetype. And again, warrior doesn't have to be, and you understand, but warrior doesn't have to be someone who's in the military. It's an archetype within all of us. So we all need to draw on our warrior when we need to be firm and resolved, and when we're clear about where we stand and we don't want to get pushed around. But in order to be a warrior, you need to know where you stand and what your lines are of demarcation, right? Because if you don't stand for something, you fall for anything. And if you don't stand for something and some bully comes along, whether that bully is an organization or your dad or your brother or just anybody else in the world, then you're not going to have the resolve to fight back. So the warrior ethos starts with cultivating a personal ethos, which is clarity, deep clarity around those questions that I mentioned earlier, like what is my purpose in life, what am I passionate about, how am I going to align those, and what are my principles which are going to keep me aligned as I move toward that, and then to develop a very profound vision of what that looks like for you, because every one of us is unique. I mean, you and I might articulate our ethos a little bit, it'd probably be pretty close, but the way we're going to fulfill that in the world and impact the world is going to be radically different because of our unique set of skills and gifts, right? And mine is a Navy SEAL, and so my ethos is a deep commitment to self-mastery in service to humanity. And that service is through training and teaching and inspiring through this integrated training model that I've developed through SEALFit. Yours is going to be something different, right? At any rate, that's a really important distinction of what the warrior is. And then, this notion that we can set ourselves on a path toward mastery, and it is a journey. And we have to basically take certain steps to train ourselves and take responsibility for our growth. Remember, we had a brief conversation about fixed and growth mindsets. I call it fixed and flowing. So once we decide that we can grow, and then we must, in my opinion, we must take personal responsibility for that growth, right? Otherwise, how are you going to lead it in the right direction? Okay, and part of that growth as a warrior is to develop deep awareness of what's going on around you and inside of you. We call that situational awareness, right? So we use the color code system to develop or to be sensitive to what's going on around us. Now, this is very relevant today based upon what just happened in Paris, and this notion that we need to upgrade our alertness so that we can both avoid and detect and, if necessary, deflect and deter situations like that before they happen. A great example is that Marine, and I think maybe there were 2 Marines who were on a train in Paris, right? The same group was trying to kill everyone on the train. And these guys were aware because they had this color system, at least a metaphoric representation of that. So, real quickly, white is ignorance. Most humans are in white, and we call them sheep. So there's this notion of sheep, the wolves. The wolves are the violent criminals like ISIS, those who seek to harm. And the only thing standing between the sheep and the wolves is the sheepdog. Okay, so that's a metaphor. So, of course, Navy SEALs are sheepdogs, but we're not the only sheepdogs. We can't be the only sheepdogs. There's only 1,800 of us, and we're out there on the very pointy edge of the spear. So, who's the sheepdog back here? Well, it's everyone in this room. And it comes through increasing our awareness or elevating our awareness out of white into yellow. Now, yellow is, imagine that your mind has a radar scanner, right? And it's always switched on. White is switched off, complete ignorance. Yellow is where you're switched on, where you're still going about your daily business, but you're scanning, right? You're always scanning the environment. So a good example of how this plays out, if I go out to dinner with my wife, I'll scan the environment outside to see if there's anything that looks like a threat, or and you don't have to be weird about it. This is more of it's a sensation. You're not like scoping around the corners, taking out your mirror and stuff like that. It's more like trusting your intuition. Right. Like getting in touch with your belly and saying, okay, how does this feel, right? And if something doesn't feel right, move on. Trust yourself to that level, move on. Enter the restaurant, scan the restaurant. Find a seat where you can have your back against the wall facing the door. In fact, when I go out after like a training event with my SEALFit coaches who are all Navy SEALs, it's kind of stressful because we go into a restaurant and we all race for that seat. I got this, because we can't stand sitting with our back to the door. Because we're the sheepdog. We want to be there to protect if something goes on. So that's yellow. Now, what if I'm sitting in the restaurant and I got my wife and my son, and we're enjoying things, and I see, or I sense, and see something happening either outside or maybe someone enters the restaurant, and something's not right. Well, now I switch to orange. Now, orange it's obviously more elevated state of alertness. It's now more focused, and so like yellow is scanning, no threat, but I'm still scanning. I don't go back to white just because I don't detect a threat. Orange is ping, right? My radar pinged on the front door. And so now it's a focused awareness as opposed to a relaxed awareness. And now all my energy focused. I still don't, jack my wife and son up and say, okay, we got to get out of here because I don't know what's going on yet, but my energy is focused now. And I'm starting to process what's going on deliberately. And then if it turns out to be a credible threat, that's red. And for the sheepdog, red is action. And action, could be, come on, we're out of here, out the back door, or take it into our own hands. Right. So imagine there were 15 of us sheepdogs in that theater in Paris. Right. How the outcome would have been different. Because instead of cowering or running from the sound of gunfire, the Navy SEALs train you to run toward the sound of gunfire because that's where the information is. That's how you learn, which direction to go. That's how you get closer to mission success. Not running away from gunfire. Now, that's a metaphor. I'm not asking people here, if you hear gunfire to run toward it. No, it's probably a bad idea unless you're a highly trained, military operative. But my point is that we can't wait for the wolves to just do what they do. We've got to elevate our awareness, and we've got to, disarm them, deter them, deflect them, right? And if everyone takes responsibility for this, that's how we solve this problem.
There's so many things in that story. I'm going to try and go piece by piece. I'm sure each one is going to branch, so I'll start with the most important one, intuition. You've said that Navy SEALs aren't born, they're trained, and same with intuition, that you can develop your intuition. So if I wanted to train my intuition, what does that look like?
Okay. Training of the intuition happens as you get more and more control over your physiology and your psychology and your emotional.
Talking about the 5 mountains.
The 5 mountains, and so we'll go there. So the way I look at it is we have 5 core intelligences or domains that we experience life. We have the physical body, and the physical body, can be trained through exercise and yoga and functional fitness and whatnot. And we have your mental life, right? So your mental life, looked at it very narrowly, is just your brain and how your brain functions. It's, science will look at it and say, hey, the brain, because information comes in the hippocampus, and then your neocortex does this thing, and your limbic system does that, and they reduce your entire mental life to synaptic firing and neuroendocrine system stuff. I think the mind is greater than that, personally, right? There's more to it than just what's happening inside that brain. But your mental life is certainly influenced by your health of your brain, as well as how you, like you being like your core self, how you learn to manage and control the quality and the quantity of the thoughts in your thinking mind, as well as to access what we call your perceiving mind. The perceiving mind is where those subconscious beliefs and subconscious patterns lie. So that's all mental development. That's the mental domain. The third domain is your emotional domain. Now, this is a rich area of opportunity for us to grow as human beings, because that emotional domain is what really trips us up. That's where that boo is, right? The emotional patterns, some are thought, but usually it's an emotional response or an emotional trigger or pattern that is driving behavior that later shows up as a thought to reinforce that emotion, right? So that domain is really important. So once you start to work with these 3 domains, and all of a sudden this 4th domain of intuition becomes much more exposed, right? Because you don't have emotional energy that's blocking out the information. You even feel it right down here. So your belly, we call it the belly mind, is really active, and you're able to sense information. And there's a flow of information between you and even another human being or your environment. Over a course of 12 months to 18 months training with one group of guys in a platoon, we would develop, unequivocally, we were developing some form of extrasensory perception. And I could tell, because I was the leader of the platoon, could tell what my guys were thinking. I could tell if they were agitated. I could tell if they didn't agree with my decisions, even if they didn't say anything. And at the first sign of danger, our point man or rear security, it wasn't a sound usually that triggered them, it was their sensations that triggered them. It's really interesting. And so that's the intuitional mountain. And to get there, you need to kind of go through those other layers, those other dimensions, the physical, mental, and emotional, in order for that pureness to be accessible.
It's interesting. You talk about your Kokoro camp as, you say, meet yourself for the first time.
Right.
Tell people a little bit about the camp, why it is that we have to get to that point through the body.
So Kokoro camp, the word is Japanese from the martial tradition, and it means to merge your heart and your mind into your actions. So it speaks to a sense of wisdom that comes from leading with your heart, so to speak. So Kokoro camp is about transformation. And what it is 50 hours of non-stop physical, mental, and emotional training. No sleep. It's around the clock. And we modeled it after the Navy SEALs Hell Week. Now, Navy SEAL Hell Week for me was week number 7 in my training, out of God knows how many, I think 30 for the initial BUDS program. So week number 7, we trained from Sunday afternoon at about 2 o'clock, and we had our breakout until Friday afternoon. And it was around the clock, no sleep. We got 4 hours of sleep on Thursday, and that was largely just to mess with us, right? you imagine what 4 hours of sleep would do after not sleeping for 100 hours.
Right.
The first 24 hours are largely about the physical. And so we have like elite level athletes, CrossFit Games champions and Navy SEAL candidates and whatnot. And it's largely, can I make it through these challenges that we've designed that are largely physical and mental in nature, and as well as emotional, right? So anyways, what happens is that, because we're training around the clock, and we're not, like weaving baskets and doing things, right?
Yeah.
No, this is hard training. The body begins to go through a process of, exhaustion and then renewal, and that second and third wind, and then, your mind gets fatigued from the lack of sleep, and the cold, starts to work its magic on you, because we're in and out of the ocean a lot and we're outside, that you get to this point where, you've kind of like burned through the physical and the mental, and even the emotional, and now you're at a point where you must simply rely on your team. And for a lot of guys, this is really powerful, because this is where you have to open up to being vulnerable and to ask for help, and to be able to offer help, even unsolicited, right? And so this is a profound experience for a lot of people, to especially big tough guys come in there like, I can't do this.
Right.
I am broken, or I am at this point where I just don't have anything left. Can you help me out? Or to look at someone and say, you know what, I'm suffering, like really bad, but so is Joe. Joe's really suffering too. Yeah. So maybe together, right, if I can help Joe, then that'll help me. And we cue and we train you throughout this weekend to learn, we call it taking your eyes off yourself, putting on your teammates. So we force that to happen until eventually it becomes second nature. And this is one of the profound things, is what happens through the training is you begin to realize that it's really not about you. It's about the we, or it's about my teammates. And if I've got 30 other people in the class, if I can help every one of those 30 people make it through training, then I've got 29 people watching my back. This is exactly one of the main principles that I used when I went through SEAL training. Is I had a boat crew, 7 other guys, and I told myself, I said, these guys are going to be standing with me at the end of 6 months. I said, I'm going to do everything in my power every day to make sure that these guys get through the training. So it wasn't about me, it was about them, right? And then they, of course, knew that I was working for their good, and so they wouldn't let anything happen to me.
That's so powerful.
It was super powerful. So it was almost like a 20x effect, where I was getting way more energy by helping this team out than I was if I was just in it for myself. And we all stood there at the end and graduated, all 9 of us. It was profound, yeah. And then, the mental attitude that you bring to something as well. So in Kokoro camp, we teach that there's 4 primary skills of mental toughness. You recall those as the big 4 from the book. The first is control over your breath. And control over your breath gives us the sense that everything's okay. Right? When we train breath control, and then we can come back to that in any crisis situation, or any challenging situation, or any situation for that matter, then it's a reminder to us that we are actually in control. And what's profound about that is when you breathe with the way we teach you to breathe, then you're calming your nervous system down, and you're controlling your mind in a sense that you're able to start to pay attention and to manage your thoughts. So if you're in this training, like a Kokoro camp, and you're suffering, and you can come back to your breath, then that breath gives you the space to look at what's going on in that cranial housing group, and then inside that cranial housing group, we can realize that we're suffering, and that we're internal dialoguing in a negative way. Like, I can't do this. I'm in trouble. My ankle hurts. I got blisters on my feet. What the heck are these guys doing to me, right? All of that is negative. We call that feeding the fear wolf. And negativity destroys performance. Whether we're talking about becoming a Navy SEAL or being a good mom, negativity destroys performance, and it brings everyone around you down to the lowest common denominator. So we teach that through the breath, you open up the space to be able to control your mind, and within that controlling of the mind, I'm not talking about mind control like Russians controlling, my mind as a military operator. I'm talking about controlling your own mind so that you can eradicate negative thought patterns and negative emotions, because they're close related. A negative thought will trigger an emotion, a negative emotion will trigger a thought, and then that becomes that reactive, obsessive, downward spiral into hell or quit. right? So we interdict that and we redirect our mind to a very positive, powerful internal dialogue and imagery, which then triggers an emotional state. And then, so that brings the visualization into play, which is the third skill. So we work on our imagery and make sure that imagery is performance-based, because imagery is a form of thought, and it's the link between emotions and cognition. So then we get that all lined up, and then we find the next task that we can do, what we call micro goals. What is it that I can do right now that's going to lead me through this situation toward my vision of victory, right? And as soon as we have this saying that doubt is eliminated by action. As soon as you start moving on those micro goals and you're maintaining the positive attitude, now you're feeding the courage wolf instead of feeding the fear wolf, and you're breathing deeply into each moment, right? You're in a very present state, and all of a sudden, all that pain, all the suffering just immediately goes away. It's like, disappears. The reason it was there is because you were focusing on it, right? It was obsessively focusing on it mentally and emotionally. And when you shift your mind and use it in this way, all of a sudden, pain and suffering goes away, and all this energy comes through you. And part of that is because those next actions in that state, in that positive state, include your team, right? So it's not what can I do? Follow me, everybody. No, it's like, what can we do? Let's go in this direction. Let's solve it this way, and let me help you, right, get to this other side of this challenge. These are skills that can be trained, and they're skills that the Kokoro camp is really, it's a test. We call it a crucible test. The skills, if that's the first time you're exposed to them, it takes about 24 hours to work with them to realize, oh my God, these are money.
What was the why that got you through Hell Week, you personally?
That I felt it was my destiny. And so that there was no quit. There was no quit at all. In fact, the only way for me to be removed from that training was in a body bag, right? And so because I knew that, I had that sense of certainty, I made it my mission to get my team through it. So that was my why. Now, that was connected to this sense of purpose that I had, that I was meant to be a warrior and a leader.
The one thing, though, that I want to push on a little bit is what does being destined mean to you?
Yeah.
Because that doesn't, for me, and everybody's different, but for me, I don't believe in destiny that is absolute. So, do you believe that there's a destiny for everyone that's absolute?
I think it's dependent upon the individual as to what they choose that destiny to be.
So
that's
destiny,
what I mean. I'm not talking
for
about,
you as a choice?
Right. I'm not talking about, hey, God has this specific plan for you. I think I hear that a lot. And what I say to that is that plan is largely, the element of that might be true, but that plan is largely driven by you. So let me describe how I felt this. When I had gone through this process with Nakamura in New York, and I was working as a CPA, and I, over a year to year and a half long process of meditating and asking these questions and deciding that what I was doing was not it. Right. And so that led me to trying to go through this process of figuring out what it was, and I settled upon the SEALs. Then I used every skill that I had learned up to that point in my life to train for it, to make sure that it became a reality. And when I said that I'm going to be a Navy SEAL, I said I want to remove all barriers, and I'm going to train to become a Navy SEAL. And now I call that process winning in your mind before you enter the battle. And that comes from a famous Sun Tzu quote. Sun Tzu is the Art of War author, right? Several thousand years ago. He said, victorious warriors win in their mind, and then they go to the battlefield. Losers go to the battlefield and seek to win. It's basically what he's talking about. It's, I quoted exactly right. So that was profound to me. And so for a good year, 9 months to a year before I even got admitted to the SEAL program as an officer candidate, I upped my physical training because I knew that was going to be important, but I did some mental training. And that mental training was largely around breath control and visualization. So I visualized myself in a future state having graduated the SEAL program, graduated BUDS. And I developed a very, very strong mental image of what that looked like and what type of person I was to have accomplished that task in the future state. And once I had that vision clear, I added a lot of energy and emotion to it, so it when I visualized it, it felt real. Then what I did, Tom, is every single day I made that, it was 20-minute practice. And I had a little wooden bench that I'd gotten called a Seiza bench. And I would sit on that bench and I would do breath control, just to calm my physiology down and to calm my mind down. And then I would conjure up that image and I would just stay there and practice that image. I developed different contexts for it. Me as a SEAL, me graduating, from BUDS as a SEAL, down to the time of day, and a lot of detail in that. And I practiced it. I turned it into a practice every single day. And it took a lot of faith for me to do this, I guess, because I didn't know if this was going to work. I had this sense of certainty kind of wash over me that I was definitely going to be a Navy SEAL. There wasn't any question in my mind anymore. I went from, wishing, dreaming, hoping, desiring to knowing. I didn't know how else to describe it. And about a week later, the recruiter I'd been working with called me and said, "Mark, great news. You got selected to go to Officer Candidate School with a follow-on to SEAL training. You're one of 2 people this year we selected. Wow. Congratulations." I said, "Cool." And he's like, "You don't sound very excited." I said, "Well, I am, but, I knew this was going to happen, right? I just had a sense." And then when I flew in and, I stepped across the quarterdeck and I'm like, yeah, I'm here. Wow. Right? I just felt like I was home. And so the rest was history, as they say. I just had to, I had to do the work. And I had to do the work at a very, very high level of, courage and competency. And I had to, there was nothing that visualization did for me except for probably remove a lot of obstacles and give me this amazing momentum and sense of confidence to show up and put out every day knowing that it was my destiny. That's what I mean by that. I don't think it was anyone else who created that except for me. Having said that, if that path was out of alignment with my purpose, with my God-given purpose in life, I think all sorts of roadblocks would have come up, right? And I think that it would have been pushing, against a strong headwind. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If you had to describe, in a universal way, a life lived maximally well, what would it look like?
Well, one of the things that we do in our training, and this all goes back to this notion of developing a strong personal ethos, and that ethos gives you clarity about where you're meant to go with your life, how you're supposed to serve others. So I believe we're all here for a purpose, and that purpose is in service to other people or humanity at large. But it's unique for every one of us. So gaining clarity about what that is what I mean by your personal ethos. And Navy SEALs are very clear about where they're going and why, right? And so I ask everyone, you got to get that clarity. We've got to develop a personal ethos. So one of the tools and practices we have is to write your own epitaph. Right? And then another one is to visualize, go into a deep state of visualization and visualize yourself meeting 85 or 90-year-old version of yourself. And in those moments, you ask yourself, how did I serve greatly? How did I achieve my purpose? Right? How did I fulfill my ethos? And when the answers come to you, which they inevitably do, especially if you spend enough time with this, it's always around the impact you have with a certain group of people who are very meaningful to you. And for some people, it's family. And others, it's, service to protect, right? Like a lot of my SEAL friends, they're duty bound to serve and protect, their culture. And so a life lived well is when you can answer that question. Why? Why am I here and what did I do with that? And to be happy with the answer. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when we have our last breath, nobody looks back and talks about how much money they've accumulated or the MBA, CPA, right. Those types of things.
It's a pretty damn good answer. Mark, thank you so much for coming on today, man. That was incredible.
My pleasure.
Absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
All right, tell these guys, where can they find you online?
Well, I am online when I jacked back into the Matrix. So you can find me at SEALFit.com. That's where my blog is. And we have a podcast. The podcast is on iTunes. It's called Mark Devine's Unbeatable Mind podcast. I have some books that are available on Amazon. Right? One's called Unbeatable Mind, and one's called The Way of the SEAL, and then 8 weeks to SEALFit. And those are probably the best place to start. Yeah.
They are. I will very much agree with that. All right, guys, I hope you have enjoyed this episode as much as I have. This one was definitely a red letter day for me. Absolutely incredible. Dive deeply into his world. You will be rewarded with intellectual, emotional, intuitive, just all around holistic rewards that will boggle your mind, from the breathing techniques and how it can apply itself into just the most insane of situations. It's incredibly powerful, it's incredibly usable, and he truly, truly is the definition of a spiritual warrior. If that means something to you like it means to me, if your vision of creating the life that you want to live for yourself involves gaining mastery in an area that's meaningful to you, I'm going to tell you this man is second to none. It is absolutely incredible the way that he has explored his life, listened to his own intuitions, changed direction whenever he needed to really fulfill on that vision that he had for his life, but his willingness to admit that that vision comes by creating it, that it's not just handed down. It is an utterly fascinating journey into his world that will change yours, I promise. Boys and girls, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. This is a weekly show. You can check us out on iTunes while you're checking out this man's podcast. So be sure to go to InsideQuest.com as well. And if you want tickets to the show, while you're on the website, click Get Tickets. I hoped you guys were as moved by this as I was. I'm literally freaking out. So everybody, until next week, be legendary, my friends. Take care. Mark, thank you.